Wouldn't it be amazing if we had endless time and endless amounts of money to promote music? That would make things a lot easier, but the sad reality is most people do have to work for a living, and even though that means they are bringing in some money, it doesn't necessarily mean they have disposable income. And I get this comment on my YouTube videos all of the time. What happens if I don't have that much time because of a full-time job? What happens if I can't afford it because even though I am in a full-time job, I haven't got that much disposable income? Check out this comment I got from Blair. Going missing, I suspect the vast majority need to go to their day jobs and life's responsibility have taken hold, perhaps a function of the catch-22 phenomenon of those paying bills in absence of streaming revenues. And I understand people have responsibilities, and so not everyone can put all of their time and all of their money into their music. So that begs the question, what is the perfect strategy for releasing music when you do have a full-time job? Well, firstly, let's clarify what we mean by a job, because that is so vague. So I've come up with 3 examples. The first of those examples is Dave. Dave works in a coffee shop, maybe Starbucks. Now he gets minimum wage plus a couple of tips. It means the hours are quite sporadic because it shifts, but it does mean it's quite flexible should something come up. Now the good news is Dave doesn't have a commute, but the bad news is he also doesn't have any disposable income. By the time he's worked for the entire week, all of that money is going into his bills and responsibilities. Now secondly, we have Jenny. Now Jenny works full-time as an office manager, which means steady hours, decent pay. But she also has quite a long commute, which means she doesn't have that much time. And on top of that, she has a small amount of disposable income, but not a crazy amount to input into her music and her music promotion. So her biggest issue at the moment is trying to juggle. She doesn't have that much time and she doesn't have that much disposable income. And then thirdly, we have Tarquin Merriweather III. Now Tarquin is a banker, so the money's bloody good. The problem is it is a high pressure job and it does take up a lot of hours. Needless to say, he's also got a 2-hour commute to get into the office, which is right in the center of the city, so he really doesn't have much time. That's his biggest issue. So how is he going to manage when he does have the money, but he doesn't have the time? So you can see it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. They have different disposable income, different time, different responsibility, different burnout, different skill sets. But the one thing they do have in common is they do all work full-time. So if you do have a full-time job, I want you to answer these 5 questions. Number 1 is, how much time do you actually have? Most people don't even know how much time they have. I want you to get a calendar and I want you to go through the entire week and I want you to cross out any time that you are not available, whether that's commuting, whether it's working, whether it's responsibilities. And then what I want you to do is I want you to highlight the time that you do have. And if you're into cooking and you like to get home and you like to spend a good hour cooking, I'm not accepting that. This is you saying, I don't have the time, so we do have to find it, and we have to find it from somewhere. This is all about priorities and only doing the most important thing and making sure that you utilize that time well. Now, way back in the day, I used to teach bass guitar. That was my job for 4 or 5 years. And the amount of times that I would sit with bass players and they'd say, whoa, I was practicing for 6 hours. And I think to myself, no, you weren't. You were playing for 6 hours. You had the guitar in your hand for 6 hours. But what were you actually doing with that 6 hours? Because if you were actually practicing all of the right things for 6 hours, you would have got better in the last 7 days. And it's the same thing when it comes to this. You might say, oh, I'm working really hard for 3 or 4 hours a night. But what are you actually achieving? And that's where prioritization comes in. Number 2, how much disposable income do you actually have? Now, as we discussed, Dave has none at all. All of his money goes into keeping himself alive and not going into debt. Whereas Tarquin, he's got all of the money, but he's got no time. But what we need to do is we need to figure out how much disposable income we can claw back from places. So therefore, if you're doing your shopping at Whole Foods or Marks and Spencer's, then we need to look into that. If you're spending 50, 60 bucks on getting your guitar restrung and cleaned, then we need to look into that. We need to figure out where the money's going and how much you can bring in, because small amounts of money really make a difference. Number 3, what are your expectations? What are we trying to do here? Because if you say, I've got no time and I've got no money and I want to be the biggest artist in the world, then that's really difficult. Whereas if you said, look, the first thing is I want to be able to leave my job and support myself from my music, then I say, great. But the question then becomes, by when? At what stage do we need to do that? Obviously as quick as possible, but now we're breaking things down. Now we're looking at this in a tangible way. The reality is you can build a really strong fan base with zero money at all, in the same way as it helps to have money, but it really helps to have time, because that's how you look after people when it comes to content creation and money, etc. Number 4, what does your team look like? Is this solely you, or do you have other people around you, whether that's a band, whether it's a girlfriend, whether it's a boyfriend, husband, wife, sister, brother, mum and dad? Who can you call on? Because even if you can get a couple of hours a week from a few people around you, friends, family, relations, etc., that could make all of the difference. So you need to go and write down the people who are close to you, even if it's a couple of people who just love what you do, the super fans that you could say, do you know what? I just love that you are really into what I do. Why don't you come and help me and support me? Because they will, because they love you, because they want to be a part of this. But if we can find 2, 3, 4 people who might be able to take on a little bit of responsibilities, we might be able to do 3 times the amount of damage. And number 5, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Because this doesn't just come down to time and money. This comes down to you. This comes down to your skills. And you might say, well, I'm actually really good at videos, or I'm really good at photography. Or you might say, I'm terribly disorganized and I'm really not creative whenever it comes down to social media content. Okay, well, if we know where the strengths are and we know where the weaknesses are, that's when we can do this thing called going where the treasure is. Because if you say, I can pick up a guitar and I can play something that is going to floor you, then it's like, great, we're going to do that every single day. That's the easiest way to build an audience. If you say, I'm amazing at making videos, great, that's the thing we're going to do, because that's the thing that's going to build the audience. So we need to know, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And if you say, songwriting, I write songs every single day, good, those are assets. We can use those to build the audience. You can see this isn't just about saying, here's my song, how do I get this in front of people? You're saying, no, my music, my song, my talent, my personality, my skills, how do I build an audience? Slightly different, but that's the way you can build the audience and from there monetize. So let's look at 3 things that you can change today that'll make the biggest difference when it comes to you promoting your music, even though you've got a full-time job. Number 1 is prioritization. And the interesting thing here is most people are thinking of all of the things that they need to do. They're focusing on all of the lists that they need to do. What they should be doing is focusing on all of the things that they can cross off the list. What's the bits that I can get rid of? Don't need to do that. That's not important. That isn't a must. I can get rid of that. All of a sudden, you are left with the most important things. And I don't include things like making the music and mixing and mastering. I class that as kind of managing the product or managing the art. I'm talking about the promotion. Once you get into the habit of, well, I can batch content once a week. Good. Okay, well, that's my content creation sorted. Well, I'm going to post every day. Okay, I'll allocate 30 to 40 minutes for actual posting. Maybe 20 minutes for comments. All right, well, that's an hour a day. Maybe 3 or 4 hours on a Sunday for making the content. Well, I'm like, okay, where's the next bit? We got more time. There are 24 hours in a day, and I do not buy into this, well, I work full time, so I have no time. You sleep 8 hours a day. You work 8 hours a day. Let's say you commute for 2 hours a day. Well, there's still 6 hours a day. So it's more about what you do with that time. Number 2. Stop thinking that Spotify is the game, because it absolutely isn't. Spotify is an outcome. Now, if you're trying to play the game of Spotify, you are going to have a large library of music, because that's where we're going to build, we're going to get people in, and you're going to have to get a lot of people listening to get your 0.003 to turn into enough money to quit your job. But that isn't the point. The point here is, how do I go and make 10, 20, 30 grand a month from me and my brand using the music to build me? Oh, well, I can do that, because one person who listens to a track, well, that's 0.03 or 0.003. One person who buys a t-shirt, for example, oh, it's $30. Well, that's a lot easier. If I go and do gigs and people pay $20 for a ticket, well, I'm like, well, that's a lot easier. There's so many ways that we can concentrate. The problem here is we're focusing on the wrong numbers. We're focusing on the views and the followers, and we should be focusing on the fans and how to look after those fans, because there will literally be, I promise you, if you have an averagely small audience, there will be a couple of people in there that want to pay you money. They want the t-shirt. They want the gig. They want to come and see you. They want to do these things, not for you, not to support you, for themselves. The problem here is you haven't done it. You're not letting them give you money, as crazy as it sounds. Why? Because you're concentrating on Spotify, because that's the way the music industry should be. It's the wrong tradition. What we need to work on is, how do we build a fan base and how do we monetize it in a way that they will love you for it? And number 3 is the way that we pull all of this together. You build the assets. Remember this, the internet doesn't close. It's not a 9 to 5. The internet is open all of the time. Every single song is an asset. Every piece of content, if you do it right, is an asset. Every performance is an asset. Every relationship you build is an asset. Everything you are doing is assets. So therefore, we have to go to town on building these assets. There are far too many artists saying, I've got the music, what do I do with the music? Everyone listen to my music. Well, the asset's the music, but the message, well, that's an advert, and that's not what we want. So your job is to build more assets around the music. Now, there's plenty of other things that I could tell you to look into, which is, for example, create your space, your environment, because that takes away the distractions. I could say, be patient, because this is a long-term game. This is a marathon, not a sprint. You're not going to sort this entire thing out in a couple of months. I could say, this needs to be fun. That's why you got into this, and so the journey needs to be as fun as possible. I could also say look after your audience like they've never been looked after, because if you can do that, you can turn them into fans. And audiences listen, but fans buy. So it's all very well having audience numbers, but what we've got to have is fans, because that's where we can monetize. All these things are important, but there's 3 fundamentals. The fundamentals that will build your audience and allow you to get your music out there and bring it back and monetize. And that is number 1, prioritization. You have to be able to utilize your time, utilize your money in the best way possible. Number 2, you have to have the right strategy for your skill set, your right strategy for your time, the right strategy for your money, the right strategy for your music, and the right strategy which allows you to do the least amount of work for the most amount of reward. And everyone is slightly different. And number 3, you got to build these assets. You got to start throwing stuff out there. You got to start looking after people when it comes to bringing value on social media content, because there's plenty of ways of doing that. I understand that when you have a full-time job, you are taking out a big portion of your day, and it's draining. And it doesn't necessarily, you do mean have disposable income. But we can't allow this to be an excuse, because there are 24 hours in a day and there are 7 days a week. So this comes down to problem solving. How do we work our ways around it? Because I promise you there are ways around it. Anyway, I hope that helps. If you can do me a favor, come and say hi in the comments below, or hit the like button otherwise. Come and be a part of this community. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck. Don't work too hard in your full-time jobs, because your music is much more important. Thank you very much. I'll catch you soon.